So what you got to say is what what was going on. Well, you can say a couple of things. You can say a few things about it. I mean, first of all, you can say that I think there was probably three kinds of riot going on. There was what I'd call a community riot, which is what happened in Tottenham. Kind of started by the police shooting a Mark Duggan, and then the police refusing to deal with the family or make an explanation to the community, and then there's a demonstration, and then the police knock this young 16-year-old woman about, and then there's a riot. And the riot involves lots of people in the community, lots of people watching, all ages, lots of different ethnic groups out. Everybody in Tottenham has a little pop at the police because they're, very angry about what's happened. And those riots are generally fought over territory, which is what happened in Tottenham High Road and stuff like that. And there was other kind of instances of that. I would say in Hackney as well, that was similar. Lots of aggressive stop and search next day, caused a little bit of trouble, and it breaks out into riot. Police tried to take the estates. So that's kind of community riot. There's a few of them. But the majority of the riots were commodity riots, which means that basically people wanted to go and get some stuff. And if you want to go and get some stuff in these days, you have to be organised, because then most of the stuff that you might want to get is in shopping malls and retail parks, and we haven't really got a high street anymore.
Yeah.
So there's not much point trying to loot my local high street,
Well, this was the thing. People again, especially like the Daily Mail, when they were all taking the piss out of the fact that people rob Poundland and that, but if there's only Poundland and charity shops on the high street, that's what you're going to rob, isn't it?
Exactly. And that's why you've got to say that these groups organised looting that went on was, sort of very well organised. I mean, people realised they needed vehicles, bikes, they needed communications to be able to find out where targets were, and they went out and got the stuff. I mean, whatever you might think about it, is like, at the end of the day, people going out to get stuff from retail parks, as far as I'm concerned, nobody lives in a retail park.
Totally, yeah.
So there's not much danger of, people being particularly hurt or anything. And
because this is
so,
it's
like shopping really without money.
Yeah, this is the thing that it's funny looking back now, it's a year later, what the threads were that were put out, and that was there was the poor Malaysian kid with a backpack to show that it was mindless violence, but then there was also the local corner shop that got done over. But surely, I mean, is there any figures on that about how much?
There is, yeah. I mean, I did a load of work in August and September last year, and I came up with a figure of 7% of the targets that were hit at the time were what you might call non-chain sort of shops.
7%, so 93% were. So
big 93% were basically chain premises or banks or other stuff like that. So, but actually, the figures did come out, later in the year, and I can tell you now there were something like 2,000 odd properties damaged or attacked, and of them only 9% were non-major retail shops so, and then you've got to be a bit careful about that. I mean, it's it's a bit naive to talk about these little corner shop, this little image of a little tiny shop. Sometimes we're talking about quite big stores. I mean, you could argue that the Reeves furniture store, so famously burned down in Croydon, it was all this family business and all this. Well, no, I mean I think the Reeves family live in France or something. So yeah, and it's been these people are not small retailers. Right. They might be independent, but they're not small retailers. So you've got to be a bit careful about that. So it's probably a lot less. But the point is, the majority of targets were, I could give you the top of the leagues if you want,
Yeah.
So the main things that were taken were electronic goods, food and drink, and clothes.
Right.
The main things, right? Top of the clothes, which clothes and shoes, was JD Sports.
Yeah.
Very popular. Top of the electronic goods was Argos. Right? And top of the food.
I suppose you got it all out the back in a big warehouse, haven't you? So.
Yeah, number one in the food and everything, as usual, was Tesco. So, they were the main targets if you had to pick them out, and they were mainly people taking electric, like trainers and stuff like that, bits and pieces. So, that tells you basically what was going on. So all this malarkey about, little shops and it's all an attack on local communities, well, not really.
You were saying that there was 3 types of riots. What was the third one?
Well, the third one's quite interesting. I looked at riots in the 80s and stuff like that, and more recently, over the last sort of 20, 30 years. And what was interesting was what I call anti-rich riots. There was a few examples of this in London: Pimlico, Notting Hill, Ealing, Sloane Square. Interesting. And it appears that groups of looters, people travelled to those areas, not maybe a mile or two, but they seem to have been much more indiscriminate with their violence in those areas. I mean, if you might remember on the TV, there was, I think various people interviewed, and they, from the Ledbury restaurant, which was attacked by the rioters, and
what was that?
Very posh restaurants, and premises in Notting Hill and places like that were attacked, and and Ealing. And what's interesting about it is that the people in those areas were told, they were quite wealthy areas around there, and they were told, oh, you know, you might be attacked in the afternoon. But the residents thought because they were so posh, there was no troublemakers around their area, that they would be safe. So they didn't take much notice of it. But unfortunately, they didn't expect people to travel,
Right.
which they did. And then it appears that their violence in those areas of the looters and rioters was much more indiscriminate. So they wrecked everything.
Right.
The BBC reporter said there were streets in Notting Hill, posh areas of Notting Hill, where every single car and every single shop was damaged. So people weren't even looting, they were just wrecking the areas.
Yeah.
And they also attacked people in restaurants, and obviously a guy was killed as well.
Fucking hell, I didn't know that.
Yeah, bloke came out and tried to stop a fire and stuff and got whacked and then died.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like, you know, so something funny going on in those areas.
Well, that's not mindless.
No.
Whatever you think about that, that's not
Yeah.
mindless, is it? That's sort of motivated.
Yeah, we call it discriminating indiscrimination. So it's like making a decision to go out and wreck an area. Whereas in other areas, people are not bothering with that because they want to get some stuff. You know? And in Tottenham, obviously, they're fighting the police. So there's different things going on in riots. That's the point. You can't characterise it all as one thing or another. It's not always straightforward. But that is interesting. Anti-rich riots happened.
Yeah.
'Cause that's a new phenomenon, I would say, recent.
So what were they doing in the restaurants? Robbing people then?
Yeah, well, it was a bit like one of the scenes I heard people who were interviewed in a restaurant. I think it was a Ledbury, one of the poshest restaurants in London, and they said it reminded me of one of your heroes, Lucy Parsons. But we'll talk about that. But unemployed marches in the Chicago, America, and in the 30s in Britain, where the unemployed people would march down to the Ritz in London and stand outside in the snow or whatever, watching all the rich people eating their food. This happened in the 30s, and there were riots around that, and that's very much similar to what happened this time. I mean, the people in the Ledbury restaurant were sitting there, and then suddenly they said there were hundreds of young faces staring at them through the windows appeared. All people staring in. They just stood there for a long time, and the diners apparently moved back away from the windows, got their tables moved by the waiters and things away because everyone was a bit intimidated. And then the kiddies ran in and started robbing the place. So there was people mugged and there was fighting and all this going on. So it was kind of targeted, and it didn't really happen anywhere else in the country. These were targeted attacks on these areas, and people just decided that because they were wealthy areas, they're going to smash them up.
And it's funny because, like, like, how much percentage was that? Like, sort of not a big percentage.
No, small
but
percent.
Probably, like, sort of around the same as the small shops. And it's funny how that wasn't the trend. Because that could easily, like, in a different time or a different place, they could easily have sort of taken that and said, oh, my God, like, the underclass is attacking normal people. It's funny how they sort of pick it out. And then